old man in the front row was crying, but Kurt Cobain had never seen him before in his life. That's what stopped him mid-song during Come As You Are. Not technical problems, not feedback, not the usual chaos that could derail a grunge show. It was the sight of this stranger, maybe 65, wearing a flannel shirt that looked older than Kurt himself, standing perfectly still while tears streamed down his weathered face. The man didn't belong. Everyone else in the Portland venue was college-aged, pierced, angry, alive with a kinetic energy that Nirvana's music demanded. But this old man just stood there like a monument to grief, clutching something in his gnarled hands. Kurt's voice faltered. The guitar felt suddenly heavy in his grip. Behind him, Chris and Dave kept playing, unaware that their lead singer had just been transported somewhere else entirely. The crowd kept moving, kept screaming, kept being everything a grunge audience should be. But Kurt couldn't look away from the old man's tears. When the song ended, Kurt should have moved into Lithium. Instead, he did something that made roadies backstage grab their radios and venue security step closer to the stage. He stopped everything. "Hold up," Kurt said into the microphone, his voice cutting through the crowd's anticipation. "Something's happening down here that I need to understand." 400 kids turned to follow Kurt's gaze. When they spotted the old man, the energy in the room shifted. This wasn't part of the show. This was something else. Kurt set down his guitar and jumped off the stage. Not the calculated leap he'd done countless times, but an urgent, graceless scramble that sent a shock through his knees. The crowd parted instinctively as he approached the old man, creating a circle of space around them. Up close, Kurt could see what the man was holding, a photograph, black and white, creased with age, showing a young soldier in Vietnam-era fatigues. The soldier had Kurt's eyes, Kurt's angular jawline, Kurt's exact same crooked smile. "Jesus Christ," Kurt whispered, loud enough for the nearby microphones to pick up. "Who is this?" The old man's voice was gravelly, broken by decades of cigarettes and regret. "This is my son, Michael. He died in Da Nang in 1970. He paused, struggling with the words. "He was 22, same age you are now, and he looked exactly like you." Kurt felt the world tilt sideways. The venue's lights seemed to strobe, though nothing had changed. Around them, the crowd had gone completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something beyond entertainment. "I mean, exactly," the old man continued, his voice growing stronger. "Same hair, same build, same way of holding his shoulders when he was nervous. When I saw you on MTV last month, I thought, for just a second, I thought my boy had come back." Kurt stared at the photograph. The resemblance was impossible to deny. It wasn't just similar features. It was like looking at himself in a military uniform. The same hollow cheeks, the same distant expression, even the same way of standing with weight, shifted to one foot. "What was his name again?" Kurt asked, though he'd heard it clearly the first time. Michael Patterson, but everyone called him Mickey." The old man, Mickey's father, smiled through his tears. He played guitar too, used to say music was the only thing that made sense in a world gone crazy. Kurt felt something crack open inside his chest. Not the familiar ache of his own pain, but something different. Something that felt like recognition across decades, across death, across the impossible gulf between what was and what might have been. "Mr. Patterson," Kurt said quietly, Can Can I hold that for a second?" Mickey's father handed over the photograph with the careful reverence of someone passing along the most precious thing they owned. Kurt studied it, looking for differences, for proof that this was just coincidence. But there were none. Looking at Mickey Patterson was like looking into a mirror that reflected not just his face, but his soul. "I need to tell you something," Kurt said, his voice now projecting clearly through the venue's microphone system. "I've spent my whole life feeling like I was supposed to be someone else, like I was living the wrong life, in the wrong body, in the wrong time." He held up the photograph for the crowd to see, though most of them were too far away to make out the details. "This is Mickey Patterson. He died in Vietnam 23 years ago, and he looks exactly like me." A murmur ran through the crowd, not the excited buzz of a concert, but something deeper, the recognition that they were watching something that couldn't be explained, only experienced. Kurt turned back to Mickey's father. What did he want to do if the war hadn't? "He wanted to make music," the old man said without hesitation. "Had this dream of moving to Seattle, starting a band. Said he was going to write songs about everything that was wrong with the world, but make them beautiful anyway." He paused, looking directly at Kurt. "Sounds familiar?" Kurt's hands started shaking, not from nerves or stage fright, but from something much deeper. The feeling that he was standing at the intersection of possibility and loss, of what was and what could have been. "Mr. Patterson," Kurt said, "I need to ask you something, and it's going to sound crazy." "Son, I'm standing in a grunge club talking to a rock star who looks like my dead boy. Crazy left the building an hour ago." "Do you believe in—" Kurt struggled with the words. "Do you think it's possible for someone to live a life that was meant for someone else?" Mickey's father was quiet for a long moment, studying Kurt's face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that had been haunting him for decades. "You know what Mickey's last letter said?" he finally asked. "Said he'd found peace with dying because he knew his music would live on somehow, that somewhere someone would pick up where he left off." The old man's voice cracked. "I never understood what he meant until tonight." Kurt felt tears starting to blur his vision. Around them, the crowd had begun to sit down on the dirty venue floor, understanding instinctively that what was happening required reverence, not energy. "I want to play something for him," Kurt said, surprising himself with the words. "For Mickey. Will you help me?" Mickey's father nodded, wiping his eyes with a flannel sleeve. Kurt climbed back onto the stage, but everything felt different now. The guitar in his hands, the microphone, the lights. They all felt borrowed, temporary, like he was using someone else's instruments to play someone else's songs. "This next song," Kurt announced to the crowd, "isn't mine. It belongs to a soldier named Mickey Patterson, who died in Vietnam before he could write it. But somehow, I think I know how it goes." Kurt began to play, but not any song from Nirvana's catalog. Instead, he found himself finger-picking a melody that seemed to come from somewhere outside himself. Simple, haunting notes that carried the weight of loss and the fragile hope of connection across time. And then, without planning it, he began to sing. "If I could trade my voice for yours, would you sing the songs I never wrote? If I could live the life you lost, would you guide me down the roads you never walked?" The words weren't coming from Kurt's conscious mind. They were emerging from some deeper place, as if Mickey Patterson's unwritten songs were finally finding their way into the world through Kurt's damaged vocal cords. The crowd was mesmerized, but none more so than Mickey's father, who stood transfixed in the space below the stage. As Kurt sang, the old man began to mouth words along, not Kurt's words, but different ones, words that seemed to harmonize with the melody in ways that defied explanation. When the song ended, the venue was completely silent. Not the expectant silence before applause, but the profound quiet that follows revelation. Mickey's father slowly walked back to the stage. "That melody," he said, his voice barely audible, but somehow carrying to every corner of the room. Mickey used to hum it. In his letters, he'd write about this tune he was working on, but he never got to record it, never got to play it for anyone. Kurt felt the ground shift beneath his feet. "How is that possible?" "I don't know, son, but I know this much. My boy's been waiting 23 years to hear that song played right, and tonight he finally did." What happened next defied every rational explanation Kurt had ever clung to. Mickey's father reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper yellowed with age. "This is Mickey's last letter," he said, "the one I mentioned. I've carried it with me for 23 years, but I never showed it to anyone. Until now." He unfolded the letter carefully and read aloud. "Dad, if something happens to me over here, I need you to know something. Music doesn't die when musicians do. It just waits for the right person to bring it back to life. Someday you'll hear my songs again. Maybe not in my voice, but in someone else's. And when you do, you'll know I made it home." The letter continued. "Look for someone who understands that pain and beauty are the same thing. Someone who makes sad songs sound like prayers. Someone who looks like they're carrying the weight of the world, but keeps singing anyway. When you find them, you'll know it's me." Kurt couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he was hearing. "Son," Mickey's father said, folding the letter back up, "I've been looking for you for 23 years. The concert never resumed. Instead, Kurt spent the next 3 hours sitting on the edge of the stage with Mickey's father, learning about the soldier who might have been him, or might have been channeling through him, or might simply have been another lost soul whose story happened to intersect with his own in ways that defied explanation. They talked about music and Vietnam and the weight of survivors' guilt, about the songs that live in the spaces between notes and the lives that continue in the actions of strangers, about the possibility that death isn't an ending, but a transformation, and that sometimes the dead speak through the living in ways that sound like coincidence, but feel like purpose. When the venue finally closed, Mickey's father gave Kurt the photograph, not to keep forever, but to carry until he found the right place to pass it on. "This isn't the end of Mickey's story," the old man said. "It's just the beginning of a new chapter, and you're the one writing it." Years later, Kurt would frame that photograph and keep it on his piano, not as a curiosity or a reminder of a strange night, but as evidence that music transcends mortality, that sometimes the songs we think we're writing belong to someone else entirely, that sometimes when we open our hearts to receive rather than just express, we become vessels for voices that were silenced too soon. The song Kurt played that night was never recorded, never performed again, but those who were there say they can still hear it sometimes in the quiet spaces between other songs, a melody that belonged to a dead soldier but lived on in the voice of a grunge icon who learned for one impossible evening what it meant to sing someone else's dreams into existence. It wasn't loud music anymore, just a fragile reminder that some connections transcend time, death, and understanding. That sometimes the most important songs are the ones we never meant to write, sung for people we'll never meet, carrying messages from voices that death couldn't quite silence.